uptown, and Mr. Greer run that. In later years, he moved where Ron Taylor lives,
Oh,
over
wow.
on 84. I don't know if he lived there when he was running it, but I was going to Red Level School then. We carried our lunch in the old school. There was a big tree down there, the big oak trees, and that's where we carried our lunch. We carried our potatoes or whatever we had. But what we did have to go home early to work in the fields. See, this is back in Depression days, because I was in the Depression. And we sharecropped, I won't tell all that, but we used to have to stay out and help pull cane, or fix cane ready to make syrup,
Wow.
pea cotton, hoe cotton. And James didn't have that hard a time, I don't think.
Well, that's exactly what we need to know. We'll go ahead and get started so you can share.
I don't want to talk too much.
No, I want you to. That's in this project. We want to hear. That's the thing. That's the way that we're going to remember Red Level. So.
And then I've got on here, did he ever tell you that Adams has had a store uptown? And they had, what you call it, where they sold hats, Miller now, how do you pronounce that?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Miss Adams owned that, and they also owned this house down here that Miss Alice Rogers, that the school owns. And I remember whenever their daughter got married to the Albritton, Lottie Albritton, we was at school, and we watched, they had a home wedding out there, and we watched all that, and the big shots coming in and all that. It was in us. It must have been in June or May, it was the springtime.
Wow.
And you know, they passed away, and we went to the estate sale. Me and Susan did. I always wanted to see where she lived. Yeah, that was so good. But that's some of the things. And Mr. Durham Terry had the funeral home. You knew that.
Well, I knew about the funeral home, but I didn't know all that.
Mr. Durham, he went in with the Clark's Hardware. It was Dick's daddy.
Oh wow.
And Mr. Durham Terry, and his brother was the one that, was the Attorney General, first one that told about cigarettes.
Oh yeah, Luther Terry.
Mhm.
Wow.
And we had Costin's drugs back that time, and the Costins lived in that big house behind Teddy Barrett's store, one next to the Sellerses. And Albert Lewis had a grocery store, and the Halls had a grocery store side by side.
Wow.
But I can't tell all that because I'm getting nervous.
Well, you just do what you're comfortable with. I'm going to be right here. I'm going to go ahead and start us so I don't have to take. I want you to talk and tell me I'm so interested in this.
What did James tell you? Anything about this?
He
The
didn't.
churches?
He didn't bring up that. He talked mostly about farming, and just growing up. Watching his mother. She had the boarding house for the teachers.
Susan M. owns the house where the teachers lived. And they got in their house there, they got a bell that she pushes in the kitchen, and it tells the people in what Michael's room now to come to eat. But she lives in one of the Costin houses. They own the one that side of Susan and Jamie's, and the one that the Johnses, they owned all of them, and they owned the one across the street in front of a in-house, a little brick house over there.
Oh wow.
And Mr. Powell, Miss Powell's. And that house burned, and they built that little brick house. But they all looked just about alike. And every one of them houses was on the front top line of all of that. But they moved the one that Booster's in down. But Susan's and them's is the top of the lot, and Robert's is at the top. They ain't got room enough to spit. I won't tell all that, but that's part of the history, really.
That's what we want. Well, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say Victoria Adams. I'm interviewing Miss Turner today as part of the Smithsonian's The Way We Worked exhibit in Red Level, Alabama. It is Friday, August the 15th, 2014. And as we begin, will you please state your full name?
Let me finally get settled down now.
Okay, all right. And just, do you understand that you're being interviewed?
Have some water.
Yes, ma'am. I'll go. I just poured this in a cup. I haven't drank out of it. Would you like this?
Yeah,
one?
just put this. I don't care. It's
Oh,
something
yeah.
to sip.
You can have
Yeah,
it. Yes, you
go.
go.
Sip.
Yes, ma'am. And we are interviewing as part of the Smithsonian's The Way You Worked exhibit. Do you consent to me recording this? And may I proceed with the first question?
My name's Larice Turner, and I live in rural Red Level on Hester Store Road. And I've been living at the same house since 1947.
Oh, wow.
And still live at the same place, and I know a good bit about Red Level and the surrounding areas.
Can you tell when and where you were born?
I was born in McKenzie, Alabama. That's over in Butler County, and moved to Red Level in '35. And went to Chester School, that was out from Red Level. And later they built Midway School, and then the people from Chester School started going to Midway. And then later Midway got consolidated, and I transferred to Red Level School. And I was in the 5th grade that year.
As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, anything to do with sports. I always liked sports, but we didn't have much sports back then, but I still like sports. But we did have sports at Red Level School, and I was big on the basketball player. So we had volleyball, and the boys played marbles. And they would ride the bikes to school, and everybody would take turns. That was at recess. And we'd carry our lunch out on the front under the oak trees. And then after we'd eat, everybody would play till the bell rang. And we'd come back to class.
Oh, wow. What type of chores did you have as a child?
We farmed, and we had to help with field work. And if it was time to strip the cane, we had to do that to make syrup. And we had to pick cotton, and back then we had to hoe cotton, and if it was 2 stalks, we had to take out one because they didn't have enough fertilizer to have it thick like they do now, and it had to be pretty thin then. And my daddy had, most all farmers just had one mule, and they had to put the gear out, then go back with the planter. And I have helped with the planter. At one time I plowed a mule, and I did it with the planters.
Can you tell me, like, that whenever you were a child, like, what kind of hours did you have to work?
Oh, from daylight till dark. And in the wintertime, we had to always cut wood, or either Daddy had the wood cut, we had to bring it in. That was our chores. And we had to bring in the kindling, which they called, it was that pine saplings. And then we had to always cook with a wood stove. We didn't have electricity. And I had been married for years before we ever had electricity, and it was $1 a month.
Wow. What childhood memories do you have of your family working, like your parents working, or just as a family?
Well, I can remember my daddy, after he would lay the crops by, he would walk up to Chapman, to the lumber company. He'd walk from where we lived at McKenzie at the time, walk up there, and then walk home. He'd leave home probably at 3 o'clock in the morning and walk all the way up to Chapman to work. That would bring extra money in for us. And Mom, when we worked in fields off from home, she would cook our lunch, pack it, and bring it to the field, and we'd have a picnic during our lunch break. And that was fun memories to us.
Oh, yeah, I bet that was. Do you remember hearing your parents talk about their work, what they did every day?
Yeah. Yeah, my grandmother passed away when my daddy was a young boy, and he had 3 sisters, and they had a hard life, so they moved from up in Crenshaw County to down in here, and they had to work hard. And then everybody in my time, most people had to farm, and I remember when I must have been 12, I always liked to work outside, and I belonged to the 4-H club. And back then, they'd come out and check your garden, and they would come to our house and check over to see, and then they'd report it to see how my cabbage was coming along or whatever I had.
What was your first job outside of your home?
I worked at the textile plant in Andalusia, and I worked there for 10 years, and later I went back and worked later. But my last job was working with substance abuse. They had the First Step uptown, and
In Red Level?
in Red Level, yeah. And I got to working with mental health, and I was one of the I was shift worker, and sometimes I'd have to go in at midnight and get off at 8 in the morning and work 2 shifts. And then if the nurse couldn't come in and we had new clients coming, I'd go back and weigh them in, take the blood pressure, and get their medicine ready for the next shift to come in. And I enjoyed that.
Was that where Dr. Johnson's
Mhm.
office?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
There used to be an old hotel there years, and that's where Lamar Morris was raised. You know, the singer with Hank Williams? That's where he was raised, and it was the old hotel there then.
And then they converted it.
Dr. Sanders built that, and that's where he had his clinic.
Did you contribute to your family's income when you were a child?
Oh, yeah. I didn't when I was a child, but after I got... my sister had osteomyelitis. It was a bone infection. And I had to drop out of school to help with her expenses. And she was in Birmingham up there. First she was down at Mobile, and they sent her to Birmingham. And I helped with her expenses and helped my mom and daddy. And they lived to be old too. And my mother, she had Alzheimer's in her earlier years, but my daddy lived to be 83. And I got a birthday next week, and I'll be 88.
Well, early happy birthday.
Thank you.
It's a big celebration. These are kind of going to your career questions, and then we'll move on down to the ones about Red Level. What did you consider to be your main occupation or career?
Well, I was always concerned because I didn't get to go to college. I think my best years of work would have been at Funston's Pecan Plant. I worked there and got retirement from that. They finally sold to Pet Milk, and I enjoyed that work. And we did different things out there. And I worked in the canning department where they canned the nuts, you know, the peanuts and pecans, different pieces, and they roasted them and all of that. They had a big cooker in the back, and I done different various jobs out there when I worked there. And we had the crackers, and sometimes I would go in and run the crackers. I'd go in at 2 in the morning and run the crackers. Usually the guys done that, but I always liked heavier work.
Keeps you busy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How did you decide on your career?
Well, you didn't really decide back then. You just knew you had to find work. And you didn't have anything to choose from like children do today.
Did you have to train for your career?
No, well, you'd have to take tests to see if you could work your mind and your hands fast enough. It's IQ. You'd go to Social Security office, and they would give you a speed test. And if you could move your hands fast enough, and that's the way we got jobs back then.
And did you go to the Social Security office in Andalusia?
Yeah, it was Andalusia. Yeah, and when you got laid off from a job and got retired, when you got disability, you had to make sure back then when you was before you could get your, not Social Security, you could get your pennies. Back then, you had to go and turn in so many people that you had asked for jobs. They didn't just take your word like they do now, and the government was much better back then. There wasn't as many people on disability, and they were strict. They wanted to make sure you was looking for work. And I signed up at a place one time, and I really didn't want a job, and they wanted to put me to work right then. So I told them that I couldn't come right then, but would they sign the paper? They had to sign the paper that we turned back in. And I think that was a good thing.
Did you use any type of technology in your workplace?
Never.
Did you notice any change in technology when you worked at places?
Well, we didn't. In my time, see, all this had come in since then. See, this was back in the 40s and 50s. And with the time I got to work with substance abuse, it had gotten better. And we had what they call the hotline out there. And when people would, they would threaten themselves, and they would call, and sometimes if I couldn't get a hold of the main one, I had to sort of counsel them through that, to talk them through. And as far as training, but I got my training on the job wherever I went, and I always took notes, and I didn't have to ask people, and I did the follow-ups when my clients would leave First Step. I was the one that would always call and follow up, see, at 3 and 6 months and a year, and write it. I imagine they've got it over at Ann Lucia at the main center of mental health. I don't know, but and you didn't talk about what you did on the job. You didn't discuss that, and even today I don't discuss my years of that service. It's confidential, like a nurse.
Did your work ever, well, sorry, let me back up. What were your wages or pay at your first job?
Well, the first job that I worked at the Alatax, I made, I think it was 40 cents an hour. I worked there before Social Security started being taken out. And then later I reckon it's paid off a little bit, but it finally got to be, it was like $18 a week. And my husband worked at the Southeastern Box Company, and he was the foreman there, but he got paid by the month, and him being a kind of a little better job, he made a little bit more than I did. But it was hard raising a family off that little bit of money, although you could buy sugar for just nearly about nothing, but still you didn't have any money to buy it with, so, and it was pretty hard times.
Did your work change over time?
What you mean, work?
Like,
I mean,
just in any way, did your job change over time?
oh yeah. When I first went to work at the Alatax, I worked in the laundry, and at that time we didn't have what they call the mannequins, and what we did then was press the shirts. I don't know if you went over there at the day or worked with that, but my job was folding, and during that time they tried to organize a union, and Hank Williams used to come and play for him, and he played across the road from the Alatax, and people would walk the picket line, but I didn't walk with them because I needed to work, and and then I would do a unit by myself. I'd roll the collars, press fronts, and fold all 3 jobs, but usually there was 3 to the table. One would button the shirts and roll the collars getting ready, and then the front presser would lay it out and press the front. The back wasn't touched and the sleeves wasn't. And then they put it on a little folding frame. I'd reach over and get it and fold it. And the most that I ever folded was 72 dozen in one day. But they were short sleeve shirts, sports shirts. Then we got paid. We had an average to do, and if you didn't do your average, then they didn't let you stay, because you had so much to do to make the money. And even after I went back there after the pecan plant closed, I went back and worked on dresses, L.L. Bean at that time, and we had what they call the mannequins, and that's where you pull it and dress it, and then you hook it at the bottom and press something, and the steam comes up like they have in dry cleaners. And that's what I did then, is run the mannequins then, and then size the dresses and load them out, and
so it changed. So
yeah, it changed that time from that flat folding, and we did the flat folding, and then we did them like you see them in stores, the round collars. But you didn't have I just had the table marked off for the flat folders, because you didn't have no way of keeping the collars up, you know. They were suppressed flat, you know what I'm talking about.
yes, ma'am.
But the mannequins, they brought that in, and I stayed off 10 years, and when I went back, they changed the way they folded shirts, and the second day I was back, I made production then after being off 10 years. That's what's
Wow. What do you consider to be your most meaningful professional accomplishment?
my family, my daughter and my son. So to me, and I'm just living through them now, is fond memories, and to me that was the best part of my life. And I'm more appreciative to the Lord for letting me live this long. And And I think we've got some good changes with all this technology. And maybe I'm a little different to some my age, but I think it's good. And you got a better chance of education. And there's just a lots better things going on now. And I just thank the Lord for blessing us with what we've got now. And I just pray for peace.
So you worked during World War II.
Yeah.
What effect did events like World War II or natural disasters that occurred or other types of national or international disruptions have on your life and career?
Well, there wasn't any men folks to do things around, and the women had to go work in the welding shops and things like that. But I never did want to join the service because I always felt like a woman's place would be at home and to care for the family and guide them. I'm a firm believer that children need discipline. And with the daddies gone, it was hard on the mamas of the family, you know. And it was really, really hard. Both of my brothers was in service and in the war. And my brother-in-law, I had one brother-in-law that was over in the Philippines. And it was really hard on the family trying to help with the grandchildren. And it was just heartbreaking. But the only time we ever would know too much about what was going on is when we go to the movies and see the newsreels. And back then you could get into movies for about a nickel. And we go to the movies.
And that's how you were kept updated?
Kept up, yeah. And we had a radio, and we could, hear the radio. But later then, after we got electricity, we got us a TV. It was black and white, and we could keep up with things better then.
Did you hear from your family often that was in the war?
No, it would take a long time, and you didn't never. Sometimes we never got the mail that they would send. But people didn't send packages as much back then. They didn't have any money, and two, it would take so long, to get it. And they used to read everything. I had a boyfriend that was over there, and he couldn't talk much about it because they read letters. And when the war was over, then I remember he wrote and said, well, I can talk about things I couldn't before. And he told me where he's at and what had been going on, But they was really strict.
What about food? Did it affect your ability to purchase?
We had food stamps. I still got them at the book at home. And you had to sign up. And we had a car because my sister was sick. And we had to take them coupons and get gas. We was limited. And sugar and shoes. We even couldn't just buy shoes. And it was really tough. Everybody had... we sacrificed lots of our boys had to die for it, But it was a sad time back then.
I bet. Did y'all ever have like rallies or anything, patriotic rallies in the town or anything?
Not out here in the country where we live. They might have in the cities, but mostly everybody then, you could see it on the reels, where people was working. And there was welding and doing anything that they could to help.
Do you remember any type of labor strikes or problems between workers and management at your place of employment? And how did you feel about organized labor?
Well, see, they was trying to organize it, the Altax, and I thought we had enough. I thought we was lucky to have a job like we were. And back then, there was so much difference in the way the union handled stuff and everybody else. And Mr. Sheriff had come over here, and started that business, and he was treating us, I thought, well. And I knew that I needed a job, and that's why I took on learning the other chores in there, and I worked on through that. And I never did join. They got unionized after I left, but when I went back, I never did join even then. But that time I was on private insurance and I didn't need them. And but I did see some of them in the department I was in, if you didn't belong to the union, their work wouldn't be passed as well. They would reject theirs and send them back more. And I always felt like that it was because of that.
How do you feel about the future of work in the United States?
Well, I just don't know. There's so much new technology till I got to where now you have to have a college education to about do anything. And later, I'm thinking that won't even help you. The way it's turning out, the machines is going to do so much. But so far, but there's nothing being you. Everything is him. There's nothing under the sun that's being you, because it's always been here. I don't know what scripture that's in the Bible, but it does say that.
It's in Ecclesiastes.
Uh-huh. And that means these flying saucers, and that means everything we're doing, we didn't invent that. So we don't know what's ahead, and it's a good thing that we don't. We'd mess it up, because the Lord knows.
What words of advice would you give to future generations about their careers? Or even what words of advice, when I've interviewed people, they've talked about being a woman in the workplace or a man in the workplace. What words of advice would you
I never did
give?
feel like me being a woman helped me back, because if you work and they complain now about they can't get a job, you can't start at the top. I mean, somebody's got to do manual labor. And I always felt like if you done a good job and was willing to work, they give you, and they proved that to me that I was accepted, and I could run the crackers or the Icor. That's where in the pecan business, that's where they got the machines, and they put these nuts there, and they come out through this, and it pops them, and it throws out some of the hulls before they carry them to the picking room to finish picking the hulls out on the belts. And it didn't ever hold me back. I could work in the crackers or in the Icor or any of that. And steam room, I worked in the steam room, and that was a man's job. But if you show that you can work, but you can choose now, then you can choose what you think is going to be a job, a good job, and you find out that you've wasted all that college money, and it's not. And you'll think, well, this is going to be. You can always get a job nursing if you're willing to put the time in, but it takes money and time for anything. You can't just go out there and start at the top. But
It's a really good point.
that's right. And I mean, to me, that's the way it is.
I wanted to ask you, we didn't cover it in our interview, but you have a wealth of knowledge on Red Level. Would you share some of the stories about some of the you grew up in Red Level when the streets were busy.
Yeah, I did.
Would you just tell me?
Did anybody ever tell you about we had a pickling vat uptown? Well, it was located between where Clark's Hardware is and the bank building. That empty lot right there is where the pickling vat was. And then on down below the bank is where Mr. Adams had a store. And we lived in the country and up next to Midway, and we used to pick our cotton and ride the wagon down here and get it ginned at Adams's or Fauchy's. Mr. Fauchy and them had the ginning on the other end of town, like you going to the school. And in all those stores, there was something in there, yeah. And the first one across the street, like where you go into the park, Hall's had a store there. And then Albert Lewis, that was early. In fact, he owned the property that we own now out in the historical community, Albert Lewis. And he had a store there. And then they had the post office was on that same side. And then Mr. Cook had a store on down there. And the last building was Mr. Stewart, and he had a shoe shop where he fixed people's shoes. It needed new soles or something. Back then, people had the shoes reworked because you couldn't afford new ones all the time. And then in front of Clark's Hardware, that's where the depot sat. They moved it later over to Teddy Bear's, and that's where the depot was. It was between the railroad track and Clark's, in that little place right in there.
Can you describe a busy day on
Oh,
Main
yeah.
Street?
You just go uptown and you see everybody that you know, and everybody would be walking the streets and visiting and talking and getting the groceries. This was back before Teddy's come in, and when he come in and Lindsay Brooks come in on the other end of town, they each had the grocery stores. And then Teddy started selling furniture, and I've got furniture that I got there. He had ordered it out of catalog, and they shipped it in to him. Some of the, I guess the first orders that he ever took. So it was really busy back then, and we used to walk uptown during lunch hour from school. Back then you could walk up there and get stuff and then walk back to school. And everybody was happy in school, and we had a supply store in school. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that. And the old school is where you come up from the elementary up there, and they had it was like looked sort of like a cloakroom. I'm sure it was bigger than that, and that's where they had supplies, and you could buy pencils and paper, whatever you needed there in this supply store. And some of the older students would run that in there. And we had 3 churches at one time, the Presbyterian Church, and it was right about where the new post office is. And next to his house is where the Stewarts live, and he run the shoe shop over there. And right side of that, him was a Mr. Cook, and he had a little grocery store, Junior Cook. He lives over in Andalusia now. He could tell you something about this. So,
Did you ever, now when you go down Main Street,
it's so sad. I came through this morning and there's one car parked up there. And people that works at the bank, they park side of the bank now. There's nobody uptown, and it just breaks your heart.
let's see, what else was I going to ask? Tell me about the funeral home.
Well, it was in where Clark's Hardware. Mr. Durham Terry had that. And this summer, they had little plaques. It must have been maybe 6 by 5 or something. And it had Terry's funeral home. And they got some of those over in the Pigeon Creek Cemetery. Pigeon Creek's out from Red Level a few miles. And there's several of those. And I think there's some up at the Curving Graveyard where he
handled
the time he handled the funeral to those.
And his son was Dr. Luther Terry.
That was his brother.
His brother. That was the Surgeon General.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you remember seeing him?
I don't remember him. See, we lived out in the country, so
you didn't always see
yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
Well, I know I've looked through pictures and looked in old yearbooks. There were a lot of wealthy people in Red Level.
Yeah.
Were they wealthy? Considered wealthy? That family?
Yeah, and they have children, and I think that the Purnells. I think that Mr. Purnell at one time. I think he was the in the depot master something, and Mike Purnell, his wife. I think she retired from here too, and he had a brother that was in my class, and he retired from LBW teaching, but they was kindly, and Dick Clark's dad and them, so they was a little bit more privileged than the ones that came in from like Midway School and Buck Creek and all them little schools. They closed those out.
So when y'all came here, y'all meshed with some of the other students.
Yeah, we was they closed the little schools down and brought everybody here.
I know just from looking at pictures, the uniforms, y'all always had really nice uniforms for basketball. And
our colors was green when I played basketball, and I had my name embroidered in gold right here. And we had one girl, due to her religion, she couldn't wear shorts, and she came from another school. But we used to have a good team in volleyball. We had really, really good back then. And some of those years we didn't have football. But they got later, they won lots of trophies in that. But back in our day, that was back before the war. And did all this that I'm talking about.
Were you in school during the start of World War II?
I went to work in 42, but I was in school. The Pearl Harbor was bombed on Sunday, and on Monday morning they all carried us. They carried us into the auditorium, and that's how we knew about that. We had assembly that day, and that was a sad day.
Did y'all have to practice for drills, for bombing
I
drills?
don't know what they done, because I left pretty quick after that. I had to go to work. So, but I've kept up with all this, and my daughter graduated from here. My son didn't; he dropped out. But my daughter graduated from here, and then her son too. And I always stayed involved with them. And they didn't have a band back then. My grandson was in the band, and I always supported that. And,
it's been a lot of change over time,
yeah,
hasn't it?
Yeah.
I know just in my short time just how many businesses we've lost.
Yeah, it's so sad. And when you'd sell yearbook ads, even after I dropped out of school, and they were selling yearbook ads and all, they used to really support the school. And that's sad for the school.
It is. Well, I want to ask you, and I'll stop asking all these questions, but I would like to know, what's your favorite memory of Red Level?
Well, there's just so many then. I reckon my favorite time would be when we'd come to town on Saturdays, and I had 2 girlfriends that lived near here, and I'd beat them uptown, and I got pictures of us, and you can see the water tower behind, and we couldn't see each other when school was out, and it was good when school would start, we'd get to be friends again. So to me, and this was a big town to me, being from out in the country, It's just really sad that it's got to this.
Do you, why do you think Red Level has lost so many businesses?
Well, it's fast track. The world's just moved on and left us. It has done that to so many small places. McKenzie's the same way. They build in the interstate surrounding it. Georgiana, they closed the Georgiana Theater now, and that's where Hank Williams was really, really big in. And I remember Hank Williams' daughter, the one that said wasn't his child, my brother-in-law used to room at his mother's house in Montgomery. He worked up there, him and his brother, and he remembers the day that she brought that girl back up to her rooming house. And I've been up there, but I never did get to talk to her about that. I was going to tell her that she was Hank's daughter, because my brother-in-law and his brother was rooming there. And I don't have any idea she's ever talked to anybody with that first-hand knowledge. But and they claim it costs us too much to deliver in Red Level. It wouldn't cost any more to come through here than it would go down the highway if they wanted to do that.
It certainly has changed.
Yes,
a lot
it
more
has.
fast-paced.
I don't believe it will ever pick up. People can get on the car and go down Leisure and get a snack, and you don't have to. It's just sad.
Do you remember a hat store or a place where they made hats?
Yeah, that's Adams's. Adams is on the other end of town.
And they made the hats
Yeah,
there?
and Ruth, she was a Chesser. She worked there, and then later she married a Parker. And then after he died, years later, she married, who was that guy? Mr. Grant from over about Rose Hill. But she made the hats, and she was a good seamstress, and she lived in that big house that's where the black people down there, where that new house is close to Opal's beauty shop. Well, that's where Ruth lived, and she worked there.
Did they sell those hats all over the place?
I don't know how they, But I remember my husband telling about, I don't know if it was somebody in the church back then. She wore a hat that was made there, and I can't remember what he said, but they got a hold of it after they shipped it there. Somebody in the family had put some youngun's toys or something on it. She wore it to church.
Well, I cannot tell you how much I've appreciated this and how much I've learned from it. I knew about a lot of the businesses, but I had no clue. But anything else that you would like to share, it will be.
I was talking about the churches now. See, we had the Presbyterian First Baptist. It's one up there above the post office. And Ben Taylor was the pastor there all those years. And when the members got so low in that, they come into Fairmount with us. And that was Miss Clark and Miss Barra and Hugh and Jan and all of them.
Oh, wow.
And we welcomed them in our church. And
was Fairmount as large as it is
yeah.
now?
Now Fairmount was a little church then, and it's been improved. And the little log cabin, that was part of that history of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we the oldest church anywhere. We had 175 years. A few years ago, we had I don't remember what year it was now, and we had a good turnout. People that's moved on. But we don't have as many young people because, again, they have to leave here to find work. And all of ours, my daughter was a member there when she was in school. Of course, she come back, but the most of them, her classmates, is none that was in her group out there. They settled out of town, and that's the way it is now. And to find work, you have to go where work is.
So was going to church a big deal on Sunday?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. People always just dressed up, and yeah, that was a good thing. And the ladies here, I never did belong to the what they had here, you know, Miss Louise Bell, and all of them. They used to have Miss Alice Rogers. They used to have little meetings, and they dress up and wear the hats. And Miss Florence that lived across the street from my daughters, and they all would dress up and go to one of those houses. But I always worked, and during those years, you know, I never did get to do that. But I did join the Red Hat Society later, and after my husband passed, when I used to do a lot of traveling, and we raised money for cancer, and Mavis Taylor was over that. That's Ronald's wife. And we used to do lots of good stuff for cancer. And we'd have the midnight walks and all of that. But everybody got older, and they just finally decided they quit, you know, doing things like that.
With the train depot coming through, I've heard, and I don't know for sure, nobody's confirmed it for me, but that a lot of like campaigns would happen, the whistle stop campaign. Yeah. Could you tell me about some of those?
George Wallace, yeah. He would drive down here though, and uptown, and they'd set up his table and all that. And Miss Bell, she was one of the real Democratic pushers around here. And people from all in the country and towns and everywhere, they'd come here to see Mr. George Wallace. He liked to talk about standing in the schoolhouse door, and they was just eating it up. So, yeah, this used to really be a big thing here.
Oh, yeah. And so everybody would come out?
Yeah, and down at Christie Springs Park, and that's where my daughter learned to swim. They used to, the coach had swimming lessons down there, and that where the well is now, and they used to, they'd teach swimming down there. It used to really, everything was going good here then.
Anything else that you thought of that would be? Well, I appreciate this so much, and